Hvordan endte vi opp her? I en verden drevet av en global økonomi, selskaper, foretak, stiftelser, markeder, avtaler, business. Hvordan kom vi frem til denne modellen? Dette skal faktisk ikke dreie seg om det, men heller om hvorfor du finner en blindpassasjer i hver krik og krok av næringslivet. Hvorfor skjer alt over en kopp kaffe?
What will it be this morning? Coffee?
Yes, Gracie. Cup of coffee before I start out.
Vi ligger jo helt på verdenstoppen når det gjelder konsum.
Kaffe ikke bare kaffe.
Og det mange som ikke tror det. De tror ikke de kan smake forskjell på kaffe.
Der en kjempestor verden av nyanser som setter en smak inn i det som kaffe.
Jeg tror det ganske mange innovasjoner og ideer som klekket rundt en kopp kaffe.
Kaffe blitt langt mer enn bare en drikk. Den har fått en funksjon, en fast plass ved bordet. Så fast at den har fått være med på noen av de største begivenhetene i senere historie. Kaffe ble konsumert i kontrollrommet da Neil Armstrong satte sine føtter på månen. Den franske revolusjonen startet på en måte i et kaffehus. Og nå, som vi har den internasjonale romstasjonen, konsumeres det kaffe der også. Og hvis det bare var på begivenhetsrike dager og spesielle steder hvor de drakk kaffe, så hadde vi aldri klart å nå vårt årlige konsum, som ligger på hele 10 millioner tonn. Nei, kaffe har blitt hverdag. Men hvor det denne drikken kommer fra?
There's a really interesting story about the origin of coffee. But it's a problematic one. So this story first appeared in a book published in Italy in the 17th century, and it concerns a possibly mythical goat herder called Caldi, who supposedly was herding his goats in modern-day Ethiopia. And he noticed that the goats, when they ate the beans of a particular bush, started to get very frisky.
Sort of come to life in a way. And he's intrigued by that, and he tries the berries himself, and he notices that he too is rendered more wakeful and alert.
He was a bit concerned about this, and he went to speak to the local imam, who thought that this was a really useful bean and might help Muslims stay up all night with their keeping them awake so they can carry on their devotions and prayers.
Now, I mean, that could be true, who knows? But what it does, I think, suggest is that Indigenous people know what's edible in the areas they live in and sample things. You know, they try out things, and if you don't die from it, then you eat some more of it.
So in terms of what becomes the first cup of coffee, we can't say somebody drank the first cup of coffee at a certain point, but we can say by around the 1550s, when we know that coffee is in Istanbul, then at that point it looks like the kind of coffee that we are used to today, the very dark style, Turkish style coffee.
Så der har vi altså en opprinnelse, assosiert med religion. Men hvordan fant kaffe og næringsliv hverandre?
Business and coffee have gone hand in hand since coffee first arrived in Europe. Those initial coffee houses, especially in London, for example, businesses were born from those coffee houses. Lloyd's of London, several newspapers. The New York Stock Exchange was also created in a coffee house in New York.
We're talking really about, I suppose, the first coffee houses. And coffee houses, when they were founded, tended to be patronized by business, by merchants, people who found this a good way of meeting their peers.
They popped up around different areas of London which were associated with particular things. So there are coffee houses around the Court of St James, which served politicians. Garraway's was associated with merchants. There's a coffee house where members of the Royal Society met after their Royal Society meetings. There was a coffee house for writers.
Disse kaffehusene dukket altså opp overalt på midten av 1600-tallet i London. På et tidspunkt fikk de navnet Penny Universities.
Why are they called penny universities? Both the coin and the term university seem puzzling. The penny derives from the fact that people would pay a penny entrance fee, and they could sit at a table, and they wouldn't sit in little booths or private tables or clusters. The idea was that there's a long table and you would take the first available seat and that you would have a conversation with whoever was next to you. So you'd pick up your knowledge from them.
Skulle du bli dyktig I et fag på den tiden, oppsøkte du gjerne kaffehuset, hvor du visste du ville finne fagfolk. Fagfolk du kunne lære av. Kaffehusene kan på mange måter bli sett på som noen av de første kontorene.
Which is what's happening in London in the 17th and 18th century, which is the period in which London is inventing the new financial world and inventing the world of business as we know it now, including things like the office. The office is emerging in that period and people working together. They're all happening at the same time as coffee is becoming dominant. So I think that there is a big office culture comes out of that experiment with working together in the coffee house predominantly.
Og slik møttes næringslivet og kaffe. Så det ingen tvil om at kaffe betyr mye for oss. Nå over til et tankeeksperiment. Hva om kaffen en dag var borte?
I mean, it pains me to think of a world without coffee, without the ritual of drinking coffee, especially in the office.
Jeg ser jo bare for meg med en gang når du sier det, så tenker jeg på sånne kontorlandskap, sant? At folk kommer på jobb, og ofte så det aller første du gjør, å liksom se mot kaffestasjonen. Hvor maskinen der jeg kan få med denne her kaffen som liksom sparker I gang dagen? Så det jo nesten umulig å tenke seg en sånn type arbeidsdag uten kaffe. Jeg tror det betyr veldig, veldig mye for veldig mange.
I think it would be much slower. I mean, think of all the employees who don't have that mental alertness and extra concentration.
The way that we do business now is often over a cup of coffee, either in a coffee shop or taking a coffee break. So it's hard to conceive of just regular business happening without it.
So I don't think that we can separate coffee from the modern worlds of business. It's part of our history. It also fueled the Industrial Revolution. Workers were able to do those jobs in factories that required great concentration and long hours because they had the caffeine in the coffee that their employers provided to keep them alert and concentrated. And there is a story about the history of espresso, that espresso was actually created in Italy in order to serve workers coffee in a really quick method in their breaks so that they could have multiple coffee breaks during the day and keep alert.
I think a lot of business is done over a cup of coffee, partly because of that original Islamic tradition of hospitality. That when you go somewhere in the Islamic world, there's always an offering of a beverage, and you sit down and you share it.
And that's really been true throughout history because, the coffee house's first function has often been, here's a neutral place in which two people, quite possibly from different backgrounds or different classes or whatever, can actually meet as peers. And we don't have to go through the rituals that establish which one of us has rank. And that goes right back to the first Arabian coffee houses.
Så hvis det slik at vi ikke kan separere næringslivet og kaffe, så må vi vel se på det som et verktøy.
Coffee is a way of breaking down those initial barriers and immediately kind of both physically warming the body but also warming up the conversation and getting business moving.
Nei, det jo mange forskningsstudier på hva som skjer når man tar en kopp kaffe sammen. Veldig ofte så senker folk skuldrene litt grann, og åpner seg litt mer. Får på en måte, bryter isen litt grann.
Så kan man gå bort til en kopp kaffe eller en kaffemaskin da, og så sier vet du, hva vil du ha? Vil du ha en kaffe? Vil du ha en cappuccino? Hva det du foretrekker? Allerede der så har jo isen blitt brutt. Så tre mennesker som møtes, de da allerede litt sånn klare for et møte.
Men så ser jo jeg også veldig for meg at det skjer mye rundt den kaffemaskinen da. Når da folk har kommet dit og står der, så det også mye viktig som skjer der.
Because that's where everyone meets. Everyone congregates towards the coffee machine. If you want to find out how a company is going, don't go meet the CEO. Just go around the coffee machine and listen. You will find out in an hour what everybody else is doing.
Linken der med kaffe jo møteplasser, altså sosiale møteplasser på et kontor.
And it's probably, it's not an accident that it's a drug which keeps you awake and makes you talkative and more alert. But I think it's equally important that it has this sort of metaphorical association, or cultural associations with busyness and togetherness.
When you're having a cup of coffee, you relax. And when you relax, you tend to be more open and more vulnerable and more authentic about yourself. You know, it's like the setting. You know, if you're with your wife in a busy environment, in your house with children and things, and you can't really relax. But if you sit down with your wife and you're making yourself a cup of coffee and you sit down to talk, it's like the pace of life comes down, and then reality comes in, and then you can be more intimate, you can engage at a much deeper, more meaningful level.
Kanskje det akkurat det vi trenger. Møteplasser. I en verden hvor alt går så fort, hvor mange møteplasser blitt digitale, virtuelle. Kanskje vi trenger noe å bryte isen med, noe som senker skuldrene og varmer.